The early morning of December 7, 1941 began like any other Sunday for Doris Miller. Below deck on the USS West Virginia, the 22-year-old sailor from Waco, Texas, was doing what the Navy had assigned him to do as a black man in a segregated military, collecting laundry. Miller had enlisted in the Navy in September 1939, knowing full well that institutionalized discrimination would limit his career options. Under naval regulations at the time, as a black man, he was ineligible for promotion. He had been assigned to serve as a mess attendant, relegated to cooking, cleaning, and laundry duties. Black naval sailors like Miller weren't trained to use weapons, only to feed ammunition to officers behind the trigger. They weren't even allowed to wear the Navy's anchor and chain button insignia. But what the Navy didn't know about Doris Miller was that his upbringing in Texas had made him an excellent marksman. They didn't know that as the ship's heavyweight boxing champion and a former football player, he possessed extraordinary physical strength and courage that would soon be tested beyond measure. They certainly couldn't have predicted that within minutes, this man they considered fit only for menial labor would become one of the greatest heroes of Pearl Harbor. When the surprise attack began, Miller reported quickly to his battle station, only to find that the anti-aircraft gun had been destroyed. The West Virginia, a massive battleship, was taking a horrific pounding from Japanese torpedoes and bombs. Explosions rocked the vessel. Fire spread across decks. Men screamed in agony. Chaos reigned everywhere. Miller ran from the laundry area to the magazine, the spot on the ship where he was expected to deliver ammunition, but it was flooded, and so Miller kept moving. He encountered Lieutenant Commander Doris Johnson, who ordered Miller to drag the wounded Captain Bennion to safety. He did the same for others below deck, wading through waist-deep water to do so. Captain Mervyn Bennion had been mortally wounded by shrapnel from a bomb hit, and Miller, using his considerable strength, attempted to move the dying captain away from the most vulnerable parts of the ship to a place where he might receive medical attention. But there was no safe place on the West Virginia that morning. The ship was being torn apart. After helping evacuate wounded sailors from below deck, Miller not only moved his captain away from a vulnerable part of the ship, but also manned other anti-aircraft guns, despite having no training on those specific weapons. This moment represents one of the most remarkable acts of initiative and courage in American military history. Here was a man who had been denied weapons training because of his race, who had been told he wasn't capable or worthy of combat duty, taking control of a .50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun in the midst of a devastating attack and returning fire against enemy aircraft. The deck was awash with oil and water, and fires raged around him, but Miller, finding a gun unattended, and without orders and with absolutely no training in its operation, took control and opened fire. When asked about it later, Miller said simply, "It wasn't hard. I just pulled the trigger, and she worked fine." This understated response captured Miller's character perfectly. He saw what needed to be done, and he did it, without hesitation, without concern for the fact that he had never been trained for this role, without thinking about the regulations that said men of his race weren't supposed to be in combat positions. Miller is officially credited with downing 2 Japanese planes. Both he and other men continued shooting until their ammunition ran out. When it became clear that escape was their only option, Miller and the rest of the men took to the ship's boat deck, where Miller began pulling sailors from water that was engulfed in flames from the oil. The harbor had become an inferno. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks on damaged ships spread across the water's surface and ignited, creating vast sheets of flame that trapped and killed hundreds of sailors attempting to escape sinking vessels. Miller now faced perhaps his greatest test. The West Virginia was sinking, settling onto the shallow harbor bottom. Miller was among the last few men to leave the ship, now in ruins. As he and his shipmates swam 400 yards to shore, helping the wounded along the way, they dodged flaming oil and bullets being fired from Japanese planes. As the ship sank, Miller swam to shore 300 yards away, fire and bullets creating a kind of obstacle course as he paddled to safety. Think about what this meant. 400 yards is roughly the length of 4 football fields. Miller had to swim this distance through water contaminated with oil, avoiding patches of burning fuel that could incinerate him in seconds, all while Japanese aircraft continued their strafing runs overhead, bullets hitting the water around him. And he wasn't just swimming to save himself. He and his shipmates were helping the wounded along the way. Men who were burned, men who were injured, men who were in shock. Miller helped them make it to shore. The details about a broken leg mentioned in your original question don't appear in the documented accounts of Miller's actions, though given the chaos of the attack and the fact that many injuries went unreported in the immediate aftermath, it's possible he was injured in ways that weren't officially recorded. What is absolutely certain is that his actions saved numerous lives and demonstrated extraordinary courage under the most horrific conditions imaginable. Miller later told his brother, "With those bullets spattering all around me, it was by the grace of God that I never got a scratch." Even then, Miller helped scores of injured sailors to safety ashore. This last detail is crucial. After swimming 400 yards through an inferno, after being shot at from the air, after surviving an experience that would have broken most men, Miller continued helping others. He didn't collapse on the beach. He didn't seek medical attention for himself. He kept working to save his fellow sailors. Though the Japanese had sunk or incapacitated 7 of the 8 American ships in the fleet, only 106 of the 1541 members of the West Virginia crew perished. Miller's actions had undoubtedly contributed to sailors surviving the attack, in a disaster that killed 2,403 Americans in total. Every life saved mattered immensely. Miller's courage, strength, and determination to keep fighting and keep helping others meant that men who otherwise would have died made it home to their families. The aftermath of Miller's heroism reveals much about America in 1941. In the aftermath, the question wasn't whether Miller had committed a number of brave acts. It was whether the Navy would acknowledge him for his selflessness. Tales of Miller's heroics began circulating in the media almost immediately, with both the Navy and journalists declaring it an amazing display of courage. Yet the Navy initially refused to even identify Miller by name. In a list the Navy issued during the following January of those to be lauded for their bravery at Pearl Harbor, the Navy mentioned a black sailor, Miller, without explicitly identifying him. This reluctance to properly honor a black hero sparked outrage. Black journalists, along with an NAACP and a bipartisan group of Northern politicians, pushed the Navy to honor Miller, eventually leading to President Roosevelt's pressing of the Secretary of the Navy to award the sailor for his heroic acts. The pressure campaign worked. In May 1942, Miller became the first black man to receive the Navy Cross for bravery in the line of fire, which Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz presented to him. But there was controversy even in this recognition. Miller was also a nominee for the Congressional Medal of Honor, though the prejudice of then Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, who opposed black sailors serving the United States in any combat role, recommended against Miller receiving the Medal of Honor. This decision reflected the deep-seated racism of the era. White sailors who exhibited similar courage under fire received the nation's highest military honor. Miller, despite his extraordinary actions, was deemed unworthy of the same recognition because of his race. The injustice extended beyond awards. White sailors who exhibited similar grace under pressure were named, awarded, and sometimes sent home to promote war bonds. Miller, meanwhile, had been assigned to a new ship in the South Pacific, the Indianapolis, where he was again stationed as a messman, performing menial tasks. The Navy had recognized his heroism with a medal, but they refused to actually integrate him into combat roles or allow him to advance based on his proven abilities. Pressure was mounting on the Navy, not just to recognize Miller, but to rethink the organization's treatment of its black sailors. Secretary of the Navy William Franklin Knox tried to remedy the situation by announcing that black enlistees would be trained in gunnery work, as well as radio and radar specialties, at an all-black training facility in Great Lakes, Illinois. Miller's courage had forced the Navy to begin, however reluctantly, the process of desegregation that would eventually transform the American military. Miller continued serving his country with distinction. He visited his Waco home and family for the last time during a Christmas leave in 1942. Afterward, he continued his service in the Pacific aboard a new escort carrier, the USS Liscum Bay. But on November 24, 1943, during the Battle of the Gilbert Islands, his ship was torpedoed, killing 646 of its 918 sailors, including Doris Miller. The hero of Pearl Harbor, the man who had survived swimming through fire and bullets to save his fellow sailors, died at sea at age 24. His body was never recovered. He left behind a legacy that would inspire generations of African Americans in military service and contribute to the broader civil rights movement that would transform America in the decades following World War II. In honor of his life, service, and sacrifices, 40 years later, the U.S. Life, Service, and Sacrifices, 40 years later, the USAT, the new was. Navy commissioned a new frigate, the USS Miller, in 1973. It is only the third naval ship to be named after a black Navy man. The U.S. Navy also honored him by naming a dining hall, a barracks, and a destroyer escort after him. Doris Miller's story matters for many reasons. It demonstrates that courage, skill, and heroism have nothing to do with race, despite what the discriminatory policies of 1941 America claimed. It shows that when given the opportunity, people will rise to meet extraordinary challenges regardless of their background or the limitations society has tried to impose on them. It proves that heroes emerge from the most unexpected places, that a mess attendant denied weapons training could become one of the deadliest and most effective fighters at Pearl Harbor when circumstances demanded it. Miller's actions that morning saved an unknown number of lives, possibly dozens of sailors who would have drowned or burned without his help. He shot down enemy aircraft despite never receiving training. He kept fighting when others fled. He kept helping others when he could have focused solely on his own survival. And he did all of this knowing that his country, the nation he was defending with his life, considered him a second-class citizen unworthy of the same rights and opportunities afforded to white Americans. The image of Doris Miller swimming 400 yards through burning oil and enemy fire while helping wounded sailors to safety stands as one of the most powerful symbols of heroism from Pearl Harbor. It reminds us that, on that terrible morning when America was thrust into World War II, heroes came in all colors and from all backgrounds. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed America forever, And men like Doris Miller played crucial roles, not just in surviving that attack, but in beginning the long process of making America live up to its ideals of equality and justice for all.